Hi, I'm Selena, and today we are going to talk about the books that I read in December and the books I plan to read in January. So in December I read a little less than I normally do, so I have less books to talk about in this wrap-up, but I'm fine with that. I don't really put that much pressure on myself to read like in the double digits or whatever each month. I just read 8 books this month, and honestly the reason for that is partially because of exams and partially because and partially like holidays and stuff, but partially also because I just wasn't enjoying a lot of the rereads I set for myself. I decided to reread a lot this December, as I usually do in December, and I also just had some health things come up, so like it was kind of a lot of things came together, and I was just reading less, and the things I read were kind of middling, to be honest. As far as ratings go, I didn't have any 1 stars, but I did have 1 2-star and 1 3-star. And then I also had 4 4-stars and then only 2 5-stars. And of the 2 5-stars, there's only one book that I consider an all-time favorite. And so it wasn't an amazing month for me for reading, but I still read some good stuff. I only read 3 genres this month, and they are all my favorite genres. So I read 6 fantasy, 1 contemporary, and 1 classic, which I mean, I read 2 classics. One was a classic fantasy, and then one was just like a kind of realistic children's classic. And I chose not to do a classics wrap-up because I wanted to prioritize other videos in December. I didn't get to do that, but I also just knew that my wrap-up would be really short if I didn't talk about the 2 classics with the rest of the books I read, so we're just doing my wrap-up with everything in it this time. As far as age ranges go, I read 1 children's/middle grade book, it's a children's book, 4 YA books, and then 3 adult books. And with those stats out of the way, let's just get into the worst book I read of the month. It also made it to my worst books of the year list. I had not wrapped it up at that time that I posted the video, but there's a chance you may have already heard about it, and that book is Heidi by Joanna Spyri. So I am someone who really likes children's classics. They're part of what got me into reading classics, like Little Women, The Secret Garden, things like that. I really like realistic children's classics, and I also really like the whimsical variety of children's classics too. This is definitely more of the realistic children's classics, and honestly, the plot is very similar to The Secret Garden, the premise at least is. And I knew that going into this book because the copy of The Secret Garden I had actually talked about this book as a possible influence for Frances Hodgson Burnett. And so I was excited because I was like, oh, I love the Secret Garden story. What if this does it better or just as good? I was disappointed. It did not do it anywhere near as good as Secret Garden, in my opinion. So the premise of the story is basically we have this young girl named Heidi who is kind of perfect, and she is orphaned, I believe, and she's sent to live with her grandfather, uncle? I don't know. He's like an older, kind of crotchety guy. I hated it. I gave this thing 2 stars. I hated it. So why did I hate it? Well, the first thing I think partially is the reason why I didn't like this immediately, whereas I liked The Secret Garden immediately, is because the main character, Heidi, is just not an interesting character. She isn't well written. She's just like too perfect. She's sort of in the vein of like A Little Princess. Like that character is also very perfect, but I don't mind her as much because she is put through a lot of crap. And like to see her sort of rise above, that's nice. This girl is just sort of like, she's there to like brighten everyone's day, and she's like the perfect epitome of a child, and I just didn't like it. Whereas like The Secret Garden, Mary, the main character, is like kind of a brat, and it's really nice to see her develop and to see like where she gets those tendencies and what she learns from others around her and the world around her. Heidi is not like that. It's like Heidi is pretty much a done person when this book starts, and I hated it. And then she basically just exists to make other people's lives better, and she does it like super quick. Like the grandfather is like not crotchety for any time, like at all, basically. There is no like tension about whether they will have a good relationship. Like they basically have the amazing relationship from the start, and it's more getting other people to see their relationship, but also like that's barely a plot. I don't know, it's weird. And then it also is quite ableist. The other group of people that Heidi basically makes the lives better of is primarily disabled people. We have a blind woman who basically just, like, her only, like, joy in life is Heidi and hearing Heidi's voice. And it's like, this is such an awful portrayal. And then you also have a girl who is in a wheelchair. She's quite sick, it seems. It's not really specified, but she's quite sickly, and so Heidi is sent to stay with her family, and there's this really weird insinuation that like you can replace, like if that child were to pass away, they could replace her with Heidi, and I hated that. I don't want to say anything else, but like the whole like second half of this book, it has some really ableist tropes. I don't want to say much more because of spoilers, and I've already said like probably too much, so I will just let you know that I have a Goodreads review where I go into all the details for this, and so if you want to know how awful this book is, you can check my Goodreads review and I will have the information there about what exactly this book did that I hated so much. So that was my only 2-star book. The only 3-star book that I had was The Deal of a Lifetime by Frederick Bachman. And I did not like this book at all. I mean, it was okay. I gave it 3 stars. It was kind of middle of the road. I just, compared to the other Frederick Bachman books that I read, I love Frederick Bachman's other books that I've read. This was the 5th book I've read of his, and it was definitely my least favorite, definitely. And this is so short. It's like, I don't know, like 65 pages or something, and like 48 minutes on audio. So I can't say too much about the plot, but we basically have a man who is sick, and he is sort of confronted with his life and how he has been living it, and he has the chance to make a change. And the book is about that. Things that didn't work for me. I didn't form as much of an emotional connection to this book. At first I sort of thought that was like a personal problem, like maybe it was just that those themes don't like speak to me, and I think partially that is the case, but they kind of should have, you know? Like knowing what I know about me, like they should have, but they didn't. And I think partially it's because like it was hard for Bachman to fit everything in this book. He tries to like I've read a short book by Frederick Bachman, and Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer is one of my favorite books ever. And I think that the reason that works so well is because it is mostly about character, and it is so sort of whimsical, whereas The Deal of a Lifetime doesn't quite pull off that. It doesn't quite all work for me because what it's exploring, it's trying to do too many things almost. It's trying to like do character and also some plot, whereas like in Every Morning mostly like does character. I don't know, that's just one idea. But then it also, the narration, the style of the narration, Bachman does this thing with some of his books where he likes to have his narrator kind of try and trick the reader or push you in a direction that like is the wrong direction. And to me, it just didn't work with this book because it was so, like, there wasn't a way to reconcile basically what the narrator told you and what the book actually did, basically. And it had to do with the first line for me. I did not like how that was executed at all. It bothered me. It also just had like more plot holes that Bachman like created and inconsistencies in the narrative, and I didn't like it. It was okay, we'll say that. Okay, on to my 4 stars. All 4 of the things I gave 4 stars were all rereads, and it kind of surprised me. I expected to enjoy these more. And the first 3 I'm just going to talk about all together, and that is The Grisha Trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. So this is a series you probably know about. It's an older YA series from 2012, and we basically follow this girl, Alina, in the country of Ravka, as her country is at war and is very divided amongst itself, and Alina has a chance, it seems, to maybe help heal the rifts in this country in a very like literal way. And that's all I'll probably say about that because you probably know about it, honestly. So Shadow and Bone I gave 4 stars, Siege and Storm I gave 4 stars, and Rune and Rising I actually gave like 4.5 stars because I did enjoy this the most out of the others. So this is the series that got me into reading. When I first read these books, I loved them. I did give them 4 stars, but I probably enjoyed them more like 4.5 star worth. But I just didn't know about 5 stars, 0.5 stars at that point, like I wasn't doing them. And then I reread them 6 months later and I enjoyed them even more the second time. However, this last reread, I definitely do think that I didn't enjoy them as much as I did the first couple times I read them. It was still good. This was a 4 star, so it was still enjoyable, but it wasn't something that blew my mind. I do think this is a very well-crafted story in many ways. I think that the fact that this first book, Shadow and Bone, is a like kind of a school narrative, like a magical school sort of narrative, and then it gets really dark towards the end and it goes places you're not expecting. That was really good, and I still was struck by how unique that was. But there were things that got to me, like Alina and her sort of pretty but plainness. The girl hate always annoys me, especially in this first book. Siege and Storm, I was expecting to like more than Shadow and Bone, and I did, but what was unsettling to me about this book in particular was like I really loved the beginning and the ending. I thought they were so action-packed, so fun, but the middle portion of this book gets really slow, and we focus on a lot of like romance drama and like love triangle drama, and that just wasn't really my thing. Like, I wasn't cool to just hang out for as long as a time as we did, but I really do think that that part is bookended by some great moments that if the whole book were like that, then this would have been like a 4.5 or 5 star. Like, it's so good. And then Ruin and Rising is actually that for me. Like, to me, the action of this book, the tension of this book feels like the action and tension of Siege and Storm in the beginning and the end. Like, I feel like that Leigh Bardugo was able to carry it throughout in this book, and I really love that. Her character work feels better in this book. In the other 2 books, the side characters were just sort of props or there for very specific purposes that were just sort of to be like other students, and I really enjoyed that they had more personality in this book and they had their own like skills and wishes and wants and sort of things like that. And this book gets dark. I love it. The Cost of War is great. In my opinion, I'm happy with the ending of this book. Even though I can think of other endings that I would have also liked, I am happy with how this book went and how this book went down. The romance was sort of like in a very specific place in this book that I didn't mind. We were sort of done with the petty drama. At least it sort of feels like everyone had sort of settled down and was like, there's more important things to worry about, and that's exactly what I loved. I loved that we actually did focus on those more important things. We did focus on the plot, and to me, this plot felt brilliantly paced, really well done, I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. So this is a 4.5 star. It's the only one that I felt like my enjoyment stayed the same for these books, whereas like the other 2, I just sort of, my enjoyment wasn't as much as when I read them the first 2 times. But I do think that this series does hold up, and I really do enjoy it still. And then my final 4 star that I'm going to talk about is not actually my favorite 4 star. Ruin and Rising takes that because it's a 4.5 star. This I actually enjoyed quite a bit less than Ruin and Rising, and maybe some of the Grisha trilogy. I don't know. And that is my reread of 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Ugh, I know. So I read this book the first time a month after I read the Grisha trilogy, and to me, at the time, it really felt like it was a masterpiece. The character work, the plot, everything was nothing like I had seen before. The relationships, the tension, all of it. I was so into what this book did. I thought it did it so well. And now, 2.5 years later, I sort of realized that the things that I thought this book did well are not, you know, like masterfully done. Like, I've seen the things that this book does done better. And so it's not my favorite thing anymore. Whereas when I read it, I absolutely considered this one of my favorite books and one of my favorite series. I liked it better than Grisha trilogy, and I just don't know if that's the case anymore. I gave it 4 stars. I found a lot of the characters the first time to be super deep and complex, and this time I only found that in like 1 or 2 characters, and that's really sad to me. The plot didn't blow my mind. Maybe it's because I'd experienced it before, but also like I just have seen better plots than this. I truly believe that now. I definitely believe that I've seen better plots and better twists and better executions of heists and things like that. So that was kind of a bust. And then relationships, I have seen better relationships or more tension between relationships, better relationship-driven stories. I just feel like 6 of Crows, to be executed in the most awesome way, I think it should have been written later, almost. Like, I feel like she could do this a lot better now. I'm still excited for the show. I did reread these in preparation for the show, but I didn't love this book in particular the same way that I loved it the first time, and I don't think I like it as much as the Grisha trilogy anymore. I've also decided not to reread Crooked Kingdom because I don't want to ruin my memories of it anymore. I was kind of disappointed that I read this. I just wanted it to remain in my memories as one of my favorite series, but I kind of am glad that I know it's not, and so I can like better understand my reading taste now. But in that, I also feel like I don't want to put myself through rereading Crooked Kingdom when I know it probably won't be a 5 star, it will probably be a 4 star, and that in itself is going to be a little bit disappointing to me. Even though I enjoy 4 star books, these used to be 5 stars, and so I'm just not going to reread Crooked Kingdom. I assume it would be lower, but I know that this isn't one of my favorite series anymore, but I also want to hold on to the memories of me loving Crooked Kingdom. So that's that. That's all I want to talk about Grisha. Okay, and on to my first 5-star book. That book is The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is also a reread. I've actually read the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy back when I was like 14, and I didn't really enjoy them that much just because the writing was too much for me. I wasn't that into high fantasy. I'd only really read like Percy Jackson and like Harry Potter and stuff. My reading taste hadn't developed to the point where I could appreciate all that Tolkien does in these books. And I've loved getting to know this series, and I really, really enjoyed Fellowship of the Ring. Two Towers, I didn't enjoy quite as much as Fellowship of the Ring, and so I was worried going into The Return of the King. But oh my goodness, I loved this book so, so much. It's my favorite of the series. I enjoyed myself from beginning to end with this one. It's the only book where, I mean, I guess there were moments of like slight lagging, but it's the only book where I enjoyed the moments of lagging. I sort of felt stumped at some parts in the other books of Lord of the Rings. There were parts that I didn't appreciate as much. There were parts that really tripped me up, whereas I feel like with Return of the King, I really knew what to expect, and I just enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the plot. I enjoyed this so much, and the things that had tripped me up in previous books, like the pacing, like certain slow parts, didn't with this one. Plots in this book are epic, on an epic scale, on a war scale, and I really enjoyed those plots. I really just thought that the battle scenes in this were amazing, but the best part of this book for me was the characters, and I think that that's, you know, a lot of Tolkien fans say the same thing. They are really attached to the characters, and they love the depth they have, and they love seeing the relationships they have with each other, and that's what really makes this so special, even though Tolkien is amazing at writing plot and interweaving so many different plot threads. I thought this was a great conclusion to The Lord of the Rings, and I think that Tolkien pulled this off masterfully. I can totally understand the hype that Lord of the Rings gets, and I really, really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. And now, my final 5-star book, my favorite of the month, and maybe the whole year. I've said that this is my favorite of the whole year, and I don't know if that's fully true, but it is definitely one of them, and that book is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. I love this book so dearly. This is the 4th book in the Stormlight Archive, which is an epic fantasy series that follows a couple different characters. We follow a lot of different perspectives in this, but the 3 main in the first book, at least, are Dalinar, Kaladin, and Shallan. Dalinar is a high prince, a kind of a war general in this war against a race, another race, a non-human race on Roshar, their planet. And this race that had actually ordered the assassination of Dalinar's brother, the king of his country, Alethkar, 5, I think, years prior, and so they've been embroiled in this war. But Dalinar's having second thoughts. He is seeing signs that another end of days is coming, and so he's really stressed about that. We also follow a slave that is enslaved and forced to basically run bridges during this war. It's really awful conditions. He's in a really desolate place, and we get to see him sort of rise. And then we also follow Shallan, who's in a totally different place than the two of them, and she is trying to become a scholar and is trying to save her family from ruin. I loved this continuation to the series. I thought it was perfect. I think that the reason that I call this my favorite of the series, and I'm more comfortable calling it my favorite of the series, is because in each of these books there's moments where the pacing doesn't quite work, or there's parts where I'm not as engaged, even if it's just small parts, and I feel like this book has the plot I love, and also I never felt not engaged. Those things together make this favorite in the series. So many characters had so many amazing arcs that I just thought were so beautifully and sensitively done, and I love this book. I can't even tell you exactly why, but I love it. This is my favorite series. I'm so in love with it. Okay, so now that you've seen the books that I read in December, let's just go quickly through the books that I plan to read in January. This is probably not all the books that I'll read, but it also might be. I don't know. I've picked books that I'm really, really excited about, but I'm not sure whether I'll get through all of them or get through more, whatever. I don't know what I'll do. Let's start with the audiobooks I plan to listen to, and let's start with the one that I'm currently reading, and that is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I am currently 126 pages into this book, but I've been listening on audio, and it's kind of hard to tell you what this book is about because a lot of the plot that I knew about it is kind of just ended. We basically follow 3 women who are seemingly all sort of trapped in various situations and trying to exude agency in those ways. We start off with the principal main character, I believe, whose name is Miriam, whose father was a moneylender, but he was really bad at it, so she takes over his job, and in that she sort of attracts the attention of the Stark, which are these kind of icy fae creatures that live kind of alongside the humans in the world, but they're known to be tricky and evil and cold, so it's not really great to attract their attention. And then we also follow Wanda, the woman who is in sort of a bad position at home, who works for Miriam, and then we also follow a princess. She's like the daughter of a greater noble, I think, but I don't think he's like a king or anything, but she is trying to be married off by her father, and doesn't really want that. And so we follow each of these women as they sort of navigate their own situations. This book is very fairy tale-esque. It's very wintry. It's a good pick for the winter, so that's why it's on the list. Also, I've had this book for I think over a year now, almost over a year, just about a year, and I'm trying to really get those kind of books off of my TBR. This year, I'm trying to read at least maybe 1 or 2 a month. I have 12 books that I want to get through this year. This is the first of those 12. I talk about that in my recent 2020 Wrapped video. I'll link it in the eye. There's a section at the end where I talk about my goals for the year, and I mention this book and the goal surrounding reading those 12 books. And so I'll just direct you to that. There's timestamps, you can skip around. It's kind of a long video, but yeah. Next audiobook I plan to listen to is a new release, and that is Across the Green Grass Fields by Shauna McGuire. This is the 6th book, I think, in the Wayward Children series, and it follows Reagan, this girl we haven't met before, I don't think, as she goes into a land of horses. And this series is pretty hit or miss, so I'm not sure if I'm going to love this book, but I hope that I'll at least enjoy it and enjoy the world. I'm a little wary because I never had like a horse phase, but I do like magical creatures, so I don't know. Maybe I'll love this book, maybe I won't. I'm tentatively excited. Then on to some buddy reads that I plan to do through audio. The first one of those that I plan to do with one of my friends who doesn't have like a booktube presence or anything is The Rise of Kyoshi by, I think it's FCE, I don't know. The author will be on the book and I will know their name by the time I do my wrap up. And this is a Avatar sort of like companion novel about Avatar Kyoshi, who is one of the avatars in the past that interests me the most. I have not read the like graphic novels, or I've read some of the graphic novels, but not all of them. So maybe I'll read those this month. I don't know, but I really just want to get to Kyoshi, so that's what I'm gonna do. And then the other buddy read I'm gonna do, and also the first high fantasy that I'll mention this month, I'm roughly doing like 3 a month, is gonna be The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson. I'm buddy reading this with my friend Udi, and it is the first book in the second era of the Mistborn series. So Mistborn Trilogy is right here, and in that series we follow Scadrial, this planet, as it is dealing with a Dark Lord that is ruling. And in this, I don't really know what we do with this series, but I know it's kind of like a flintlock fantasy western setting, and I'm excited. That's the final audiobook that I plan to listen to at the moment during this month, but that isn't the only high fantasy that I plan to read during the month. And so I'm going to first talk about the first physical high fantasy that I'm actually currently reading, and that is Peace and Turmoil by Elliot Brooks. This, I don't fully know how to describe it either. I've heard it described as a political thriller. I haven't really gotten to the thriller elements of it because I'm only in the first like third of the book so far, but we follow a lot of different people in a lot of different places on this continent, and there's a lot of tension around this dagger on the cover, and different people wanting it, different people not wanting it, different people needing it or feeling like they need it, and just a lot of political maneuvering. I'll have a better summary for my wrap up, but I'm reading this. Oh, and Elliot Brooks is like a fellow booktuber, which I'm sure you know, but I'll link her channel just in case you don't. And then the third high fantasy that I'm reading this month that I'm really, really excited about is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. So I also don't know too much about this. I do know that it is a like Japanese inspired fantasy world on this place called the Sword of Kaigen that is sort of not as advanced as the rest of the world, or at least sort of stuck in its traditions, which I think are possibly sort of warlike. We follow a middle-aged mom and her son is sort of idealistic about war and really wants to prove himself, whereas the mom is a little bit more realistic about it. And I just know that people are saying that this is great, and so I'm really, really excited to give it a go. And then the last two books on this TBR, I'm not sure if I'll get to because I'm in a really big fantasy mood, so I'm talking about them last, but I really would like to give them a go if I get in the mood for them. And the first one of those is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This, I know, is about a woman who had a relationship with her teacher when she was a teenager, and she has always thought of this relationship as consensual, but with the allegations that come out, she sort of realizes that it was not. I've heard the book is kind of a slow realization of that fact. I've heard it's very hard-hitting, but also very moving and worth it, and so I'm excited to tentatively give it a go, but if I'm not in the mood, I may not force myself to read it, but I'm excited. And then the final book that I am gonna plan to read this month is actually a reread, and it is a classic. I'm trying to read like at least like one free read classic book a month, and I really want to give this one a reread, and that is Sensibility by Jane Austen. This is the only Jane Austen book that I have not reread since my first reading of it, and this was my least favorite Austen book, and I want to reread it with a different sort of perspective of the things that go down in this book. And keep an open mind and see if I like it any better. This book follows two sisters, Marianne and Eleanor, who have very different dispositions. Eleanor is very logical, very like reined in, like her emotions don't really control her. And then we have Marianne, who is very fiery and emotional, and we both just follow them navigate the world with their different dispositions. And yeah, it's Jane Austen, so it's supposed to be funny. It's gonna have romance in it, and it's got a lot of social commentary, and I've already read it, so I know what happens, but I'm excited to see it with a different point of view, basically. Thank you for watching this wrap-up and TBR video. These are the books that I read in the month of December, most of them at least, and I will see you on my channel in my next video. Bye!